In 2010, Beattyville, Kentucky had the third lowest median household income of any town in the United States with a population over 1,000. It was identified as the poorest majority white town in the country. Lee County, of which Beattyville is the seat, once led the entire region east of the Mississippi in oil production. This is the story of a town that had coal, oil, and timber and lost all three. Where the North, Middle, and South Forks of the Kentucky River come together, a small riverside landing once served as the lifeline for the hills of central Appalachia. This place, first known as Taylor's Landing, was more than a clearing in the woods or a backwater port. It was a crossroads for timber, livestock, and people moving downstream toward the Ohio. By the mid-1840s, the settlement took the name Beattytown in honor of Samuel Beatty, a pioneer who built his life and reputation on these banks. Beatty's land holdings and willingness to donate parcels for public use shaped the first grid of streets and gave the place a sense of purpose beyond subsistence. In 1851, the Kentucky General Assembly formally established the community as Beatty, recognizing the town's growing importance as a trading post and gathering place. The arrival of a post office in 1858 confirmed its place on the map. By 1872, Battyville was incorporated as a city, just as Lee County itself was carved from neighboring counties and named, contrary to popular rumor, not for Robert E. Lee, but for his father, Light Horse Harry Lee, a Revolutionary War hero. Battyville was chosen as the county seat, its central location at the River Forks, making it the natural hub for commerce, law, and local government. The geography shaped everything. While much of eastern Kentucky remained isolated by steep ridges and narrow hollows, Battyville's rivers allowed flatboats and later steamboats to haul timber, coal, and farm goods out of the hills. In an era before highways or railroads, the town's connection to the water meant it was never just a mountain outpost. The river made Battyville a gateway, sometimes a bottleneck, sometimes a bridge, between the world of the uplands and the markets downstream. Even in its earliest days, the town's fortunes were tied to what could be floated, traded, or shipped away. Timber was the first fortune to move through Battyville. In the decades after the Civil War, hardwood logs floated down the Kentucky River, lashed together into rafts and guided by men who knew every bend and shoal. The river's three forks gave Battyville a natural edge. Timber cut from the hills could be shipped out when the water ran high, bound for sawmills in Frankfort, Louisville, and even Cincinnati. For a time, the river itself was the town's main street, crowded with flatboats, steamboats, and timber crews working from dawn until the last whistle sounded. Coal came later, following the same river routes and eventually the steel rails that reached eastern Kentucky at the turn of the 20th century. The arrival of the railroad opened the seams beneath Lee County's ridges to distant markets. By the early 1900s, coal tipples dotted the banks near Battyville, loading black rock onto barges or rail cars, bound for power plants and factories far from the mountains. Local mines once employed dozens, sometimes 50 men at a single site, offering steady work in a region where steady work was rare. Then came oil. The discovery of the big sinking field in 1919 turned Lee County into a boom town overnight. For a few decades, this patch of Kentucky produced more oil than any other county east of the Mississippi. Wells dotted the hills, and the county pulled in tax receipts that rivaled those of much larger places. Newspaper accounts from the 1920s describe oil money flowing through Battyville's banks and into public coffers. $6 million a year in crude, $200,000 in county taxes, and $100,000 directly for local services. The effects of these extractive booms were felt on Main Street. At its height, Battyville supported 4 car dealerships: Boog Jones Ford, Brandenburg Chevrolet, Noble Pontiac, and another smaller lot, all lined up within a few blocks. Grocery stores, hardware shops, and a steady rotation of restaurants and dry goods stores filled out the commercial district. For a while, there was enough money in town to buy a new car, stock a pantry, or put a little aside for the winter. The prosperity was real, if always a bit precarious, built on what could be dug, logged, or pumped from the ground and sent away. Coal, oil, and timber once formed a three-legged stool beneath Battyville's economy. When one leg wobbled, the others could sometimes hold. But over the last 2 decades, each industry gave way in turn, leaving little to stand on. Eastern Kentucky's coal production fell by 63% from its level in 2000. Mines that once sent trains rumbling out of the hills now sit quiet. Regional mining jobs dropped from 13,372 in 2007 to just 2,797 by early 2022, a loss that echoes through every family that once counted on a miner's paycheck. Oil too faded. The big sinking field, after producing more than 100 million barrels, saw its wells go dry or fall behind as national production shifted to bigger, deeper fields out west and down south. Lee County's oil output, once the pride of Kentucky, shrank to a fraction of its former self. The steady tax revenue that funded schools and roads dried up just as surely as the wells themselves. Timber, the town's first fortune, faced its own reckoning. Local operators working with small crews and aging equipment could not compete with the scale and speed of mechanized logging outfits from outside the region. Demand for hardwood never vanished, but the profits and jobs moved elsewhere. Sawmills closed or consolidated, and the river that once floated log rafts out to the Ohio now ran mostly empty. For those who stayed, the change was personal. One mine on the edge of town had employed 50 men at its peak. By the 2010s, only 6 remained on the payroll, enough to keep the gates locked and the lights on, but not enough to fill a church pew. The collapse did not come all at once, but as a slow, grinding erosion job by job, until the old patterns of work and life simply wore away. The numbers tell a story of economic loss, but the lived reality is quieter, fewer paychecks, shuttered storefronts, and a sense that the world had moved on, leaving Battyville to remember what it once was. Lee County is growing smaller and poorer with every passing year. The 2010 census counted 7,714 people in the county. By 2022, that number had slipped to 7,261, a 5.9% drop that echoes across empty storefronts and quiet roads. Battyville itself, once the commercial heart of the county, reported 2,176 residents in the 2020 census. Some local surveys put the number even lower, as few as 1,307, depending on how you draw the city limits and who's left to answer the door. Household income tells another part of the story. In 2023, the median household in Battyville brought in just $23,750. Per capita income stood at $13,850, less than the price of a used pickup. Men reported median earnings of $28,125, while women earned $16,250, a gap that reflects both the jobs available and the long shadow of traditional roles. These are not numbers that allow for much margin. They mean hard choices at the grocery store in months when the bills don't quite add up. Nearly 40% of Battyville's residents live below the federal poverty line. That's not a statistical quirk, but a daily reality, one that shapes everything from health to education to the likelihood of staying or leaving. Lee County is not alone. 5 of the 10 poorest counties in America run through this stretch of eastern Kentucky. The region's poverty is not new, but the sense of contraction is sharper now. Each year, a few more families move away, a few more houses go dark, and the town that once bustled with miners, oilmen, and timber crews grows quieter. The numbers are stark, but behind each one is a story of someone holding on, or packing up, or searching for a way to make it work. In Battyville, the statistics are never just numbers. They are neighbors, kin, and the measure of what's left after the booms have faded. In Lee County, the slow unraveling of prosperity is measured not just in lost jobs or empty storefronts, but in the bodies and lives of its people. By 2013, men in the county could expect to live just 68.3 years, more than 8 years less than the national average. This number is not just a statistic, it is a reflection of distance, delay, and the fragile safety net that stretches thin across these hills. More than half of the adults in Battyville struggle with obesity, a burden shaped by poverty, limited access to fresh food, and the long commutes required for steady work or medical care. The roads out of town are familiar to anyone who's ever faced a midnight emergency. Beattyville has no hospital of its own. For anything beyond basic care, residents must travel miles to neighboring counties, sometimes as far as Irvine, Winchester, or Richmond, hoping that weather, road conditions, and the clock are on their side. Ambulances become lifelines, but with every mile, the odds slip further away. For chronic conditions, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, routine appointments turn into logistical challenges, and small problems can become big ones by the time help arrives. The healthcare gap here is not the result of personal failure, but of a system that has retreated alongside the industries that once anchored the town. In Battyville, every year shaved off the average life is a story of someone waiting, hoping, and sometimes losing out to the distances of geography, of time, and of fortune that define life in America's forgotten counties. The opioid crisis arrived in Battyville like a second wave of loss, compounding the damage already done by the collapse of coal, oil, and timber. In the early 2000s, prescription painkillers flooded eastern Kentucky, and Battyville quickly became known for a new kind of epidemic. The pills were called hillbilly heroin on the street, a name that carried both shame and a bitter sense of humor. Pharmacies dispensed bottles of oxycodone and hydrocodone, and soon nearly every family in town felt the impact. By the mid-2010s, emergency medical crews in Lee County were responding to overdose calls at a rate that overwhelmed their small staff. Some estimates linked up to 80% of local EMS runs to drug overdoses or related complications. Ambulance sirens became a fixture on quiet streets, not just at night, but in broad daylight. The crisis did not stay confined to one generation. Grandparents, parents, and teenagers all appeared in the weekly court docket for drug offenses or in the obituaries for accidental deaths. The consequences reached into the most private spaces, living rooms, kitchens, and schoolyards. In Lee County, it's estimated that about 40% of children do not live with their birth parents, a figure shaped by addiction, incarceration, and the ripple effects of family disruption. Many children are raised by grandparents, aunts, or foster families, their lives divided by custody hearings and the uncertainty of reunification. Teachers and social workers describe classrooms where the absence of a parent is as common as the morning pledge, and where trauma lingers just beneath the surface of everyday routines. The opioid crisis in Battyville is not just a story of young people lost to addiction. Older residents too have struggled with dependency, sometimes after injuries from logging or mining work, sometimes after surgeries from which the pain never fully faded. Pharmacies that once filled prescriptions for arthritis or high blood pressure now keep naloxone on hand for overdose reversals. The result is a community where the boundaries between generations have blurred. Children caring for ill parents, grandparents stepping in as guardians, and families trying to hold together through waves of grief and hope. The damage is visible in the numbers, but also in the faces of those who remain, carrying the weight of both memory and survival. For young people growing up in Battyville, the road out has always been narrow, but in recent years it's become more like a single lane with no shoulder. For decades, more than 1 out of every 3 teenagers in Lee County left high school before graduation. The pattern is not new, but its effects have deepened as the world beyond these hills has changed. Even for those who finish school, the next step is rarely close to home. Only 5% of residents here hold a college degree, a number that stands out in a country where higher education is often seen as the surest path to stability. The reason is as much about distance as it is about dollars. There isn't a single college, technical school, or university in Battyville or anywhere in Lee County. The nearest campus, whether it's Eastern Kentucky University in Richmond or Hazard Community and Technical College, can mean a drive of 40, 50, even 60 miles each way. For many families, that distance is a barrier as real as any locked gate. The limits on education ripple directly into work. When the Lee County Correctional Institution closed its doors in 2021, about 150 jobs disappeared overnight, one of the last large employers left in the county. That loss was felt not just in paychecks, but in the sense of possibility. Without local options for higher learning or steady employment, the choices narrow further. Some young people leave, hoping to find work or schooling elsewhere. Others stay, looking for a foothold where so many rungs are missing. In Beattyville, the shrinking map of opportunity is drawn in school enrollment charts, empty classrooms, and the long, winding roads that separate ambition from access. Every October, the Woolly Worm Festival brings a burst of life to Beattyville's streets. Since 1974, families have gathered to race fuzzy caterpillars, listen to bluegrass, and fill Main Street with laughter that echoes off the old brick storefronts. For a few days, the town feels full again. The festival is more than a diversion. It's a way for neighbors to see themselves as a community, not just a place left behind. Marlene Walker, who has chaired the event for decades, describes it as a homecoming, a reunion that outlasts hard times. Just down the street, the Downtown Battyville Alliance works year-round to preserve what can't be replaced. Their projects, like restoring the Guthrie Building with a grant from the Kentucky Heritage Council, don't erase the empty storefronts, but they do keep hope visible. The Alliance's director, Tommy Hayes, has said that every window repaired and every sign repainted is a promise that the town's story isn't finished yet. For many, daily life depends on federal lifelines. Social Security, Medicare, and food assistance make up a large share of household income in Lee County. These programs aren't luxuries, they're what keep the lights on and the cupboards from going bare. The pattern stretches back to the War on Poverty era, when President Lyndon Johnson came to eastern Kentucky in 1964, shining a national spotlight on families trying to build a future with little more than grit and government help. When the Kentucky River flooded in March 2021 and again in June 2022, it washed through homes and businesses already battered by loss. Recovery came slowly with FEMA grants and state aid helping families rebuild. Neighbors hauled furniture from muddy living rooms, volunteers set up shelters in church basements, and the Woolly Worm Festival returned just months after the water receded. Each effort, festival, preservation, federal check, or sandbag, carries the same message. Survival here is hard-won, and persistence is measured by what people do for one another when there's little left to give. Today, the old Battyville depot stands empty, but the Kentucky River still winds past Main Street, a reminder that geography alone never guarantees prosperity. Median income here hovers under $20,000, a number with real consequences for every classroom and clinic. Yet on festival days, the courthouse lawn fills, and resilience outpaces statistics. As fortunes shift, what endures is the stubborn dignity of a town refusing to disappear. Share your thoughts below.